bed every night, knowing that, despite the wishes of whoever did the tucking in, unpleasant dreams are sure to come, takes its toll on a child. This is the story of a poor soul who, every time he drifted to sleep, had unsettling and eerie dreams. Dreams that honed in on his most secret dreads and fears. Dreams that were hard to explain because they never seemed scary coming from his mouth the next morning at breakfast. But these dreams bothered him in such a personal way that they seemed downright invasive. And the lack of sleep made the next day exhausting and surreal for the young lad, which in turn made the following evening's dreams all the more vivid. It was a frustrating cycle, one he wished to be free from, but he had no idea how to escape. So he became calloused to it. He decided that everyone suffered from these dreams, and that even if they didn't, this was his lot in life. Some people had bullies for older siblings. Some of his friends hated their parents, and his problem, his personal cross to bear, was the images and stories that invaded this sensitive boy's mind every time he slumbered. If other kids could put up with unpleasant home lives, or teachers that hated them for no good reason, or always getting picked last in gym class, little Lawrence decided that he could deal with his terrifying dreamscapes. Before he became resigned to having nightmares every night, Lawrence had tried a couple of things in the aim of attaining a night of peaceful slumber. A nightlight and a music box were his first two attempts. The music box, however, had the unnerving habit of continuously speeding up, which, besides being far from relaxing, also seemed a bit on the paranormal side. Nightlight, because of where it had to be plugged in, ended up casting twisted and demented shadows on the boy's walls, so that everyday objects like a baseball glove or a toy soldier became unholy shadow beings or harbingers of death and insanity. So in the end, neither the music box or the nightlight helped at all. And so, with these two failed attempts, our young Lawrence took on the mantle of nightmare victim. He accepted the fact that while his friends were flying, or perhaps scoring winning goals in their nightly subconscious voyages, his evenings would be filled with ghouls, spiders, demons, blood, fire, and the wails and laments of the suffering of which he was often a part. Some of the characters that populated his nocturnal city were skewed versions of real-life people. The crossing guard, the librarian, the guy behind the counter at the candy store. And some were the types of beings that could only exist in a world where the laws of physics held no sway. One reoccurring phantasm was the cook, a chef with a bloody apron that would capture, kill, and cook any cute or happy being in Lawrence's dreams, and then try to trick Lawrence into eating it. Lawrence hated the cook because it was this character that could turn any positive dream into a cannibalistic nightmare. In past dreams, Lawrence had been tricked or forced into consuming puppies, pandas, parents, and even his secret crush, this girl who sat in front of him in history class that went by the name of Adelaide. One night, while drifting off to sleep, Lawrence was fighting it. He was unaccepting of the fact that he had nightmares every night. He wondered where the justice was and why he couldn't just have one nice dream. Why was he chosen to host these images and stories that invaded this sensitive boy's mind every time he slumbered? As he tried to figure this mystery out, arguing back and forth in his mind, his eyelids started to become heavy, and he felt himself teetering off into his nightly test of will and resolve. Fighting it was a moot point. He would end up asleep, this was a certainty. Off in the distance, a foghorn rang out. And it repeated itself in minor harmonies, an invention of his exhausted mind. And he fell asleep. He looked around, trying to figure out where he was in the dream, and realized he was a character in a fairy tale, where he was a little boy who absolutely, positively, and irrevocably refused to dance. He was afraid that he might do something wrong and that people would laugh at him. And of course, being laughed at is the worst possible outcome for a young boy. His mother, his father, his older brother, and some of his teachers, even the old man down the street who had an oddly shaped eye and smelled faintly of cheese, all of these people tried to convince the young boy to start dancing. "Try it, you'll have fun," they all said, but the boy just crossed his arms, stuck out his lower lip, and shook his head no. He was convinced that if he ever tried dancing, something terrible would happen, and he was right. But it wasn't being laughed at. Oh, no, 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 it was much worse than that. And you're about to find out exactly how horrendous the outcome was, because one day the young boy met a little girl named Adelaide, who finally convinced him to try dancing.
It's easy. I'll show you a couple of steps, and then no one will laugh at you because you won't be doing anything wrong, okay? Ready for your first lesson? Here we go. Just do this. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3.
And you know what? The boy loved it. As a matter of fact, he loved it so much he couldn't seem to stop dancing at all. It was as if all of the dancing he'd held back up until that point broke a dam inside him and came flooding out. He danced non-stop for 3 days without even taking a break to eat or rest. He became a little demented from lack of sleep and nutrition, but he kept right on dancing. In the first month, he wore out 3 pairs of shoes, and his parents refused to buy him another pair, but he didn't care. He kept right on dancing in his bare feet. Finally, after days of continuous dancing in his bare feet, he wore his feet down. Yes, at the bottom of his legs, he had bloody little ankle stumps. But he didn't care. He kept right on dancing. His mom wouldn't let him in the house anymore because she didn't want him tracking blood all over the Persian rug. It was expensive. It was hard to clean. He was allowed in the kitchen because the floor was linoleum, but that was it. And still the boy kept dancing. He wore his ankles all the way down to his kneecaps, and that's when his mom knew she had to do something or lose her son forever. So she went into town and got his father and his older brother and some of his teachers, and yes, even that cheesy-smelling old man down the street with the funny-looking eye. She got them and whoever else would come and brought them all into the kitchen. And then, on the mother's command, they all started pointing and laughing. That's not how you dance. You dance on your feet, not on your kneecaps, Stumpy. And with that, the boy immediately stopped dancing and was saved from a horrible fate. And so his mother, while slightly cruel, was a very intelligent and resourceful woman, and she saved her boy's life. Lawrence awoke with a start. Just because he was getting used to having nightmares every night didn't mean that he no longer found them scary. The appearance of Adelaide in his dream made him more than a little uncomfortable. He looked around his room to ensure that he still wasn't in the fairy tale, and he checked his legs. He was relieved to find them whole. Though he couldn't be sure that he was truly awake, Lawrence felt fairly confident that he was, at the very least, not dreaming. It was then that certain unpleasant noises started becoming noticeable. They were close enough to the regular night noises, the fridge motor running, the house settling, the wind in the tree in the yard. They seemed familiar enough that no doubt they would not wake Lawrence's parents, and yet, the more he heard of these noises, the more of their unearthly subtleties he started to pick up on. Was he being oversensitive because of fatigue and leftover fear from his previous nightmare, or was something terrible about to happen in real life? Lawrence knew that he would have to answer the question by switching on his nightlight for a glimpse. He hoped that there would be nothing when he turned the light on, but reaching out of the safety of his comforter was harrowing to the young child. His arms seemed to move in slow motion, and the light seemed kilometers away. He stretched and stretched and stretched, all the while holding his breath in terror, until finally he turned the device on. When the nightlight finally switched on, Lawrence saw something. Perhaps one of the things that had been causing some of the strange noises that were disturbing him. It was an ordinary housefly on the ceiling, walking upside down, as houseflies tend to do. What made this fly slightly more upsetting to young Lawrence was that it was walking very quickly in perfect circles, 3 in one direction and 3 in the other, almost like a dance. It brought up images of the previous dream he had had, and the more he thought of that dream, and the more he watched the hypnotic motions of the fly skittering this way, scuttling that, the more tired he felt, until he was being pulled against his will back into an unconscious state. The dreamscape that he found himself in seemed unfinished. It was as if he was in a drawing on a piece of paper that had nothing but a horizon drawn on it. A piece of art where the artist put the character down first and would decide on the background later. The question was not whether this dream was to be scary. That was a foregone conclusion. But what would this dream be about? It was right then that Lawrence noticed, in the yellowed, desolate distance, a funeral procession of stick people. A family of stick people mourning the loss of a young one, moving slowly, deliberately across the barren landscape. Their faces showed as much emotion as stick people faces could, but their body language was devastating to poor Lawrence. He decided that, rather than risk a run-in with the cook where he may be forced to eat the remains of a grieving stick family, he would walk in the opposite direction. And so, Trying to console the bereaved, he patted angular shoulders and uttered platitudes about everything being okay and that sometimes these things happen for a reason. They were more receptive than he imagined, and he found himself worried about their communion attracting the demented culinary attention of the cook. So he said his goodbye and left, walking towards where the family had come from, confident that he had done the right thing. It was then that he heard the demented circus music and knew that his night was far from over. Coming closer and closer to him was a clown on a tiny tricycle. This clown was distasteful for 3 reasons. The first and obvious being that, well, he's a clown. The second reason being that the clown was singing in a battered and gruff voice. And the third and by far the worst reason was that this clown had no mouth. Where his mouth should have been, there was a sandwich. And Lawrence wasn't sure if it was a club sandwich, a BLT, or a turkey Reuben, or something else. But that was hardly the point. And to his absolute horror, this clown was eating parts of people's disembodied mouths. This is the song the clown is singing between bites. I am the sandwich mouth clown. The sandwich mouth clown. I have a sandwich where my mouth should be. If people with mouths eat sandwiches, can you figure out a snack for me? I eat teeth and tongues. I eat lips and gums. Have you figured out yet what the plot is? Because if you haven't, I'll sneak up behind you. I might even eat your epiglottis. The sandwich mouth clown. The sandwich mouth clown. People laugh at me and call me a freak. Oh, but they stop their laughing awful quick when I take a bite out of the inside of their cheek. And my favorite thing to eat are very fresh mouths that come out of babies' little faces. But if I'm really hungry, then I don't discriminate. I'll even eat a mouthful of braces. But you know, I wish I could be normal, just like all you girls and boys, with a normal kind of life, with normal fears and joys. But you know, I just cannot help it. This is the way I was created. When my best friend died last week, I ripped his mouth out, then I ate it. I am the sandwich mouth clown. The sandwich mouth clown. So very glad that we've become acquainted. You know, the last time I tried to shake someone's hand, he screamed like a girl and then he fainted. And of course, I'm not the one to look a gift horse in the mouth with that gentleman quite passive at my feet. In one fell swoop, I ate up his mouth. I wasn't even the slightest bit discreet. the circumstances. And as he ran from the sandwich-mouthed clown, hands covering his mandible in a show of terrified protective instinct, he had the uncomfortable yet familiar feeling that he was being followed. His running had actually attracted the attention of a dog, but this was no ordinary dog. This canine was close to 2 stories in height, and it did not look friendly. Chunks were missing from its ears and his lips, presumably from previous fights. As he continued to run, Lawrence decided that he would not want to see the being that could cause these types of injuries to such a monstrous canine. The dog galloped towards the terrified young boy, covering dozens of meters per stride. Everything about this aggressive quadruped screamed hunger. It was a mass of fur, flesh, and fangs with an appetite, and Lawrence was the most delectable morsel for miles. If he was not to become a tragic version of Alpo, Lawrence knew that he had to find a solution from outrunning this hellhound, because outrunning it was not a possibility. He spotted a little lake and hoped beyond hope that this dog was not a water dog or some sort of retriever. Maybe it was the adrenaline, maybe it was hope, but Lawrence's legs, oh how he was happy to have them after that wretched dream of grinding them down to stumps. His legs seemed rejuvenated, and he ran faster than he had ever run before, and was able to evade the drooling maw of the pursuing cur and jump into the lake. He felt as if his heart would beat through his chest as he splashed into the water. But relief hit him as he saw the dog saunter away, intimidated by the lake. Lawrence barely had time to wonder what was so off-putting about this body of water before he realized that the water was freezing cold. He felt his heartbeat decrease. He felt his outer extremities go numb, and relief slowly started morphing into surrender. Fine, it would end this way. He would freeze to death in a desolate mire after having evaded a cannibalistic clown and a monstrous mutt. Somehow, he seemed to know that this was all a dream anyway, and that tomorrow would just be another day. He would awake in a pool of sweat with dark circles under his eyes, but no worse for wear other than that. His limbs would be intact and devoid of frostbite. He would eat his breakfast, tell his parents that he had slept well, and go off to school. All of a sudden, an irritating question started plaguing him. Was it not true that if one died in a dream, then they died in real life too? He remembered having heard this from an older kid in grade 6 at recess one afternoon. Survival then became of paramount importance to our young lad. Head clouded by exhaustion, bitter, cold, and leftover adrenaline, Lawrence was unable to think straight. He also started to wonder if he was in fact dreaming at all. What if, in actuality, he never had nightmares? What if he really did live in a world where one could lose their legs by dancing? A world where there was a cook trying to capture and kill all that he held dear? A world where giant vicious dogs and sandwich-mouthed clowns were the norm? What if that life that he thought was real, with the family breakfast in the morning, and the family that loved him, but was just unable to understand his dreams, with the schoolyard games of tag and homework assignments turned in on time after weeks of work? What if those were simply all pleasant dreams that he slipped into when he found time to rest from this demented and demonic world that he was actually in? Lawrence decided that he would find out by simply letting the current take him. And when he could no longer hold his head above the water, he let himself sink, hoping that this was the end of another nightmare and not the end of his young life.